Morning, everybody. It is Thursday, April 28th. This is a meeting of the Curriculum Committee of the Darien Board of Education. We are pleased to welcome Keith Keeler here to talk about social studies, and Dr. Tramberg will talk a little bit about what's going to happen over the summer in terms of curriculum. Our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, May 26th. We hope to see you then. So I will turn the meeting over to Dr. Tramberg. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. We'll start with the social studies curriculum update, and welcome to Mr. Keeler.
Thank you, everyone. Good morning. Can you hear me okay with that? All right. Perfect. So, good morning, Dr. Adley, Dr. Tramberg, Dr. Klein, members of the Board of Education, welcome. I'm happy to be giving a curriculum update on social studies this morning. The last time I was here was in the spring of 2019. At that time, this is what we did. We gave a program overview, we looked at the inquiry process, and we gave some curriculum updates. I have found it very helpful to always come back to this inquiry process, though, and I'd like to just take a brief amount of time to recap that, because when I've talked with families and and I try to talk about the social studies, it's really important to have that as a basis and an understanding for the rest of what we do. So I'll start there just to give a brief overview of that, and then move into some of the new work that we've done as a department. So the inquiry process is really broken down into four stages within the inquiry arc. The first of which has to do with questions and compelling and essential questions. You can see on the slideshow here that I've given you some samples from our curriculum documents of what these questions are like. The essential questions are timeless, they're placeless, they're more philosophical in nature. Our compelling questions are a little bit more focused. You can see that there is a place and a time associated with them. But regardless, each of these questions doesn't have a singular answer. There's a lot of different ways that students can take those questions and interpret and understand them. And that's really what we try to do throughout the social studies. I have a short video that I'm gonna share with you now. This is a student, an 8th grade student that I met with earlier this week, who was talking me through his Civil War research paper and some of the questioning that he was going to use and come up with to use for that. Okay.
I was choosing my topic. I was thinking about what topic had a big effect on the war, and what was something that people don't realize changes the outcome so much, but it does. So I chose a topic: how media and newspapers affected the outcome of the war, which has to do with propaganda. And for my subtopics, I want to go into specific parts of that main topic. So my first one was how was propaganda spread during the Civil War, like newspapers and pamphlets and different ways that people accessed information. Then for my second one, I went with how much control of information did newspapers have, because I know it's still biased today, but there's more regulation on what they can say. And I wonder if that was a thing back then. And my third one, I said, what false information did newspapers spread? Like, what did they make people believe that wasn't true, and how did that affect the war? For my fourth one, I said, what strategies on both sides worked to help them through the spread of information? So what actually happened, and what did they use? And did this affect what happened at the end of the war and how the battles went? And my last one, I said, how did they recruit soldiers on both sides? Because they probably used propaganda to make them believe that they needed to join the war and that they should help.
Okay, great. So this is a student whose assignment is to investigate a portion of the Civil War. They have choice within what they want to do and investigate that. And you can see the development of questions. So that training of how do we question and develop good questions is something that we work on throughout the social studies with them. These are sometimes questions that teachers ask and sometimes questions that students will ask, as you saw in that video. The second stage of the inquiry arc has to do with developing discipline-specific skill and concept building. So before we can really engage in an inquiry and an investigation, there has to be a background and sufficient understanding of material, of content, but also the skills that they need to be able to do that. So I've given you a long list here. I won't talk about all of it, but I'll give you an example with the way that we look at political cartoons. This year, this was a topic that I talked with a number of families about who were wondering, how do we do this? How do we use it? How do we approach political cartoons? Our goal here is never to say, this is what you need to believe because of the cartoon. Our goal is to really encourage students and teach them how to interpret those cartoons. As you move through the 1800s, they become more and more popular and are obviously something that you can see all over the place today. So when we look at political cartoons, for example, we might look at things like caricature, size of the people who are being presented, the way that they're being presented, the tone of it, the message of it. You know, one of the things I always used to tell students is to think of a political cartoon like a flip book. And so as you go through the flip book, what's going to happen 10 or 15 or 20 seconds from then as a way of trying to understand what's the author trying to convey to his audience or her audience. So these are, you know, that sort of approach of how do we look at cartoons is necessary before we actually present them to students. And that's what happens in the second stage, where we're giving them skills, but also necessary content to understanding the documents, which comes in the third stage of the inquiry arc. In this point, we actually do the investigation. So I gave you a sampling here of some of the authors that students will read in grades 6 through 12. We're going to look at a variety of sources. We're going to be doing this in a way to try to investigate and answer the compelling or essential questions that we asked earlier in our process. The goal here, again, is to really get students to be critical thinkers. We want them to ask questions, and I always like to use the word interrogate the text. So they're going to ask questions, they're going to make connections, they're going to try to see things that are, you know, what the author's trying to say and the way that they're saying it. And this is a really exciting activity for us to do. I can say, you know, there's nothing more thrilling, I guess, than when you give a student a text that you've used before in the past for, you know, several years, and a student brings up something that you had never seen and that other classes hadn't seen. You know, it's a really exciting moment. And so that sort of thing is really wonderful to see in classes. But at this stage, we're really investigating, we're picking apart those documents and trying to understand them. Earlier this year, there were some questions about, you know, well, how do we come up with these sources? Where do they come from? And I'll pause with the inquiry look for a moment and just talk a little bit about, well, how do we come up with these sources? What's the process, the questions that we ask ourselves as we're doing this? And you can see there's some sample questions up here on the screen. We're always thinking about, does this source meet our content needs? So how much of this is related to the topics that we're trying to study with students? Is it tangentially related, or is it really do a good job of teaching a large swath of the time period or the experience of that time period? So that's the first thing we look at. We would then also look at, what's the level that this is being written at or being presented in? Is this something that's usable to students at their age level with support from their teacher, whether it be supporting questions or some sort of preliminary overview of what the text might be? Or is this something that students can handle on their own? Obviously, it doesn't do us any good to give students a graduate level text to their middle school classes, so we're always really careful with that. And then the third part of this is also looking at what's age appropriate, what's developmentally appropriate. So we want to be careful that the material we present to students is suitable for their age level. So the terms that are used, the descriptions, are they too mature? Are they too graphic? Are they appropriate? It's a challenging thing because in the social studies, we are exposing them to global events that have taken place. Many of them are not great. And so we're really careful the way that we present this to students and really trying to make sure that we have materials that are suitable for them. While this is the process we go through, this is kind of when we're coming across something for the first time. And I mean this in the most loving way possible to the 30 or so people in the two schools. I work with a lot of social studies nerds who are really into what we do. And so they spend their time outside of school listening to podcasts and watching documentaries, reading to no end, attending conferences and workshops. So the fact that they would be exposed to new sources, new material that might be useful to a class is fairly common. And so these sorts of discussions with these questions are something that happens often when we start to look at this. There are, however, frequently accessed sources that we use. So I've given you some samples here of what it might look like at the middle school, and I'll show you the high school in just a moment. Here I have a list of some of our most frequently accessed. They're typically like student magazines or short publications on a particular topic. The one that I'll draw your attention to is the last one on this list, our newest edition that came this year, which is Encyclopedia Britannica Launch Packs. This basically gives us age-appropriate, middle school appropriate document packets. So when you look for a particular topic within this site, it would basically give you a listing of 8 to 10 sources that might include a photograph, a map, a chart, a primary source, a speech, any number of things. And so when you're thinking about, this investigative process that we engage in, this is really useful. It's also a useful and a safe place that students can go to seek additional information if they're really interested in a topic. At the high school level, you can see here, again, these are some of our most frequently accessed sources. We've got a variety of textbooks that we use, a variety of sources that we would go to. So the Choices program is an online platform that we would use for our World or American classes. We have some new books that are going to be coming in with the passage of the new budget. And we'll also have next year Encyclopedia Britannica launch packs for the high school, but it'll be specific for the high school. So we'll be able to search for high school age material, which will be really useful. As students are hitting the high school, their reading ability obviously is going to be much higher. And so we also have, there's tons of free resources that are really useful when we're looking for primary sources in particular. And so there's an Avalon project is a really good one when you're looking at politics. There's the Miller Center out of Virginia University. That is a really good one. There's the National Archives and Fordham University's Internet Source Book, which is a really kind of far-reaching place to go for these materials. So we can access that and we can look at it, and then again we go through that vetting process to make sure that what we're selecting and using with our students is going to be meaningful, useful, and appropriate. This will bring me to our last stage of the inquiry arc, which is reporting out conclusions. So, one of the things that's really important is to understand that, this inquiry process is really designed to prepare students for college, career, and their civic engagement in the future. And so now that you've gone through this learning and you have asked questions, learned background information, investigated the material specifically, you have drawn some conclusions coming back to this question. And what do we do with that? And this can take any number of forms and a lot of creative forms. There's some synthesis pages produced by 6th graders this year. There can be video presentations. There can be more traditional papers, which obviously are really useful as well. On the top right here, I have a short video clip that we'll try to play. It's about a minute. It's a little bit harder to hear, so I hope it comes through. This is a 7th grader talking about the invention that she had a chance to investigate in the Industrial Revolution. Her invention, fittingly for our morning meeting, is cornflakes. So hopefully you can hear it. And I would ask just kind of keep an ear out for the end of it where the audio is a little bit clearer and you can hear her taking just kind of the basic information about this food and making some connections to the time period in the Industrial Revolution.
So I had cornflakes, and they were invented by William in 1906. And they're breakfast cereal. And when they were first invented, it was an accident because he and his brother worked on something called like a health spa. So they helped clients tend to present a variety of ailments, and one of the treatments was just to have a healthy diet. So they experimented with like baking flour and corn, and it was delicious flakes. They perfected this recipe and invented and since they're so easy to make in the morning, milk, it offered a super convenient option for people during the Industrial Revolution whose schedules were adjusting for the faster pace of civilization.
So see if I can advance this. She started to tie that into what life was like for families during the Industrial Revolution. And it's really far reaching. I mean, it's a 7th grade project. This is something that we could have really dove into and spend like an hour talking about branding. And, now we have individually contained foods and preservation of foods and all that went into that. So while I was watching this, I really had to bite my tongue and not share a lot. But it was, this is a good example of like a short inquiry. There are some of the students that I shared at the beginning who's doing the Civil War research. His is going to take weeks to do. Some of them may even span longer than that, bridging between quarters at the high school. So there's a range of what we can do with that in terms of how long an inquiry process will take. In the spring of 2019, I'll kind of depart from our inquiry discussion and look ahead at what's new and what we've been doing then. In the spring of 2019, I offered these as points that we were going to be looking at and moving ahead and working on as a department. And you can see that reflected in our, professional development that we've worked on since then. Okay, perfect. So you can see it's broken out by year. In the 1920 school year, we were looking at and working on differentiation, inquiry into social studies, and diving into that further, looking at how do we promote historical thinking skills for students? How do we get them to think like historians and social scientists? You can see the next set from the 20 to 21 school year, the asterisks there are to indicate that it was a special year. In addition to our work as a department and our historical focus on continuing with historical thinking, critical conversations, and identifying priorities within our classrooms, we were also overlaying this with how do we make our classes engaging for students, particularly in the hybrid setting. And so we were doing kind of multiple layers of learning there. Most recently this year, we had a focus on writing. And so we looked at writing assignments, how they're constructed, what are we asking students to do, how do we provide meaningful feedback to students, what does that look like, looking at samples, calibrating our expectations and also the language that we use. And then also looking back at like a writing scope and sequence to see, do we have strong vertical alignment within grades 6 through 12? Outside of the content of this professional development, I'll add that the structure that we use, that 6 through 12 setup, is a really useful one. Again, I mean this in a loving way to my department. One of the challenges that I face when we have our professional development is trying to bring them back together after letting them work in groups in grades 6 through 12, because they really enjoy that time together to hear what's going on in other classes. What does that look like? There are parallels in content between grades 6 and 7 and 9 and 10. And then there's parallels in grade 8 and 11 and 12. But it's also really helpful as we get this kind of bridging between the two schools. So our 8 to 9 transition, there's a really strong understanding of, from a 9th grade perspective, what does the 8th grade do? And the 8th graders know, 8th grade teachers know, what the 9th grade expects. And so we've been able to move closer together in that, which has been really, really helpful as well. Which brings us to our curriculum work. You can see the 3 different stages of our curriculum work here. This is the work that we've been engaged with over the last 3 years and more than that, really, where we're identifying the essential questions, those priority goals, the key knowledge, the key skills for each of these units. We're then once we have that established, which we do for all of our core classes, start to look at the evidence that students are going to produce for us, whether that be a midterm and final, a paper, a claim statement, a synthesis page, a research paper. And then we'll look at the way that we're actually instructing students. In terms of the work we've done with Western Civ, this is a sample in the spring of 2019. This was a class that I had highlighted, and it made sense to kind of come back and highlight it again now. This is a class that has benefited, I think, from some of this curriculum work. There's a focusing that we've had on our content, on our skills. Part of it is a natural focusing that had to happen during our hybrid year. Things haven't been that typical. So I'm excited to kind of as we end this year and move into next year where things will hopefully be normal and all. But I think that, we'll be excited to see how that is still received by students. We really work hard to ensure that this is a compelling class that's interesting and engaging for students, because it's easy to look back at the past and feel very removed from that. And I say that interestingly as a social studies department chairperson who did not enjoy history classes in the least in my high school experience. So I'm very mindful of the fact that not every student will love it. And so we really work on making it compelling and interesting to them, and accessible. That last piece on here, the scaffolded approach, the differentiated strategies, as a department, we do this, but specifically within ninth grade, we're also really working to ensure that we meet students where they are, that we are building in extra time and extra supports for some of the first and most challenging assignments that students will get. They're challenging not because they're the first ones and that we're making them challenging, but because they're encountering DBQs at the high school level, for example, or writing expectations that are now increased as they move from 8th to 9th grade. And so we spend a lot of time teaching into that, conferencing with students, checking in with them, building them up so that they can be successful and feel supported. I feel anecdotally that I can say that the amount of inquiries I get regarding Western Civ are very minimal. They're very infrequent when they come up, and I'm happy to address issues when they do arise with families that have concerns about the class. Another area that's worth highlighting in our department is the work that we do around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So you can see here, I won't read them all to you. I've given 4 quotes from American history, from texts and speeches that are significant, each of which really deals with this idea of diversity and equality, whether it be in the form of party or in gender or in race. It's an idea that is constantly put forward, and you can see connections to this with some of our compelling and essential questions. Talking about the promises that America makes specifically, this can be applied to other times and places as well, is a worthwhile exercise. It's something that we talk about a lot. What does equality mean? Who decides who gets to be considered an American? There's lots of discussions that we have that kind of get us into this idea of diversity and equity and inclusion. In terms of what we include in our curricula, we do seek to have an inclusive curriculum that, when I think about why that is, it's really because we want to make sure that students have the most comprehensive understanding. Again, if our goal is to have students be prepared for their college, their careers, and their future civic life, having a more complete understanding of the past and different places throughout the world seems pretty essential to being a productive and capable and engaged member of a community, whether that be a local town community, a state or national community, or a global community. That idea of inclusivity, though, also extends that, in our classes, we have a lot of interesting and important discussions that take place. And so we really work hard to ensure that our students are able to participate, able to be a part of it, and really find ways to interact with one another and be inclusive in that way. I hesitate to say to feel comfortable, because I think it can be hard to have some of these discussions, particularly for the first time. Our goal obviously is not to push them to be uncomfortable, and it's more to make them comfortable in going into those settings and having those sorts of discussions. So whatever their own political beliefs may be, whatever their own backgrounds might be, whether they're regular ed students, special ed students, students with 504s, we are wanting everyone to participate and be engaged and be a part of our classroom communities. And I think the teachers in the department are really masters at that, I would say. In terms of other new work that we've done this year, We have also offered the first semester of our Black and African American Studies and Latino and Puerto Rican Studies class. This is one that you likely remember. The state of Connecticut has asked basically each high school to offer this course. There was a lot of preparation and work that went into this, and it was a class that the students who took it really enjoyed it. It was a really interesting class, and we're excited that that we were able to offer that. We also were able to offer the Blues and Beyond, which was a collaboration between the 8th grade social studies teachers and the music department, where we had an opportunity to explore the history of African Americans through music. Pictured here is the group, the presenters from the Blues and Beyond, who were actually playing historical music and then tying it into contemporary music. It was certainly an interesting and engaging presentation for students to be a part of, right as we closed out that experience for them. So in terms of where do we go from here, and what does our work look like as a department? I know that Dr. Tranberg will be talking about this shortly, but we're going to be certainly creating units of study and migrating those that are existing into EduPlanet 21. We look forward to doing that in the future. Next year, just as we had an instructional focus on writing, my plan right now is for us to have an instructional focus on reading. One of the benefits of my position is that I have an opportunity to meet with teachers as they set goals, as they have observations, as we have mid-year meetings and end-of-year meetings. And so it's easy to see kind of what are the trends, where are the areas that we can still grow and develop in and help our students. And it looks like this is one that we will take up in the future. The last thing is I was just in a regional social studies director meeting earlier this week and got the update that the curriculum for the state's standards, which are going to be, the social studies state standards, are still on target and still on track to be released at the end of the school year, sometime in late June. So we're excited to see what that will look like. And, that will be something that we'll have to really study and look at and then plan for overlaying with the existing frameworks. Without going too much into it, the current Connecticut social studies frameworks that we have it's a skill-based setup. That's not changing. That's still going to be in place, and the content standards will be like an overlay with that. So we'll then see, what is the state suggesting and making expectations around with different topics and levels of depth and study and things like that. So with that, I'm open to any questions that you might have or any clarifications that I can make.
Thank you, Mr. Keeler, for that thorough presentation. I will open it up to committee questions. Go ahead, Mr. Sebastian.
Can you hear me? Oh,
Yeah.
That's better. I had a question or two on sources.
Sure.
First, I was thrilled to see Encyclopedia Britannica back on the list because I assume that means I can dust off all my old volumes and have my children use them for research purposes, fill the shelves again. The political cartoons, and I appreciate that you did discuss it. We've gotten some questions. There's been
Sure.
some scrutiny or whatever the right word is around those. Can you just take us back kind of to the basics on that? Why are they such an important source?
Great. So in the 2022 connection that I'll make to start with is I think there's a clear connection between political cartoons and the memes that students are going to be exposed to. They're kind of a newer form of political cartoon, if you will. There's brief text. Typically, the image is telling the story. So how the message is portrayed has changed, but that ability to have I'll call it a visual literacy is really important. So I think they're exposed to those quick visuals throughout their day. I would imagine most of our students, particularly the older ones who have access to their own personal devices. So that ability is a really important one. I would add that that saying a picture is worth 1,000 words is really true. And, I used to like to joke with my classes that, we could spend an entire period or more just looking at a singular political cartoon when they're done well. There's a lot to pick apart. There's a lot of meaning to find. So just like we would interrogate a written text, a speech, and really look at, what was the point that was being made? How is the point being articulated? We would do the same thing through the political cartoons. So in the long term, it's really about creating a sense of visual literacy and an ability to understand how messages are conveyed in different formats. And then in the shorter term, specific to the class, it's about understanding what did people see at the time, what were they exposed to, how did this communicate ideas, will be really important. And without maybe going too far into a history lesson, perhaps the best example would be what happened in New York City with Tammany Hall and Boss Tweed, who was able to take a few dollars from the city of New York over his time as political boss there. And the thing that really led to his downfall were the cartoons that were drawn by Thomas Nast. The people in the city of New York didn't respond to it really until they started seeing it. And that was what brought to their attention, something's not right here. And that led to things changing in the city. So a historical example, if that's helpful.
Ms. Ackman.
So thank you. And as a person who loved history in high school, this is so exciting to me, and who kept taking history classes. Just a couple things I wanted to point out. Bear with me. I'll do three. I'll try to do it in three. Okay, quickly.
Go for it.
One, just to add to the political cartoons, because I know that was, that caused some deep conversation this past year. I think also the relation to our kids and things that happen with like Charlie Hebdo and why actions are taken and how images are so powerful and the lasting impression they have. It's a great chance for us to educate our kids on what they might encounter and what feelings might stir up and what do these feelings mean and how do they inform actions, because if not, you don't understand why that is so important in the news when you see it in contemporary news. So I really like the work you're doing there. And I love this quote you have in here: comprehensive view of the past towards preparation for full participation in our democracy. Again, I'm going to go back as the GovLaw geek here, that that's really what we have in our mission statement too, that we're preparing kids to participate in their democracy, because we're handing the future over to them. We're not really telling them how to participate, but we're giving them the skills to participate knowledgeably based on facts, and their opinions and conclusions they draw are their own. So I love to see the department really encouraging kids to learn how they feel based on the information they see. So kudos to you all. Now, Western Civ. And my question is, as we prepare children, that's a tough course. Again, I have a soft spot for it. I know sometimes it might not feel like it, Dr. Adley, but I really do. I wonder, it is such a comprehensive class. There's so much to cover, and it really does inform of how we got to our participatory democracy, why we think, why we were formed as a country, why we value it so much, why it needs to be defended. Part of that is writing defenses, writing, doing these papers, the big assignment at the end, and I'm not sure if that's changed too much. But are we talking with the English department and the history departments 6 through 12 to really prepare kids? Because that is a big jump in the type of work they've done in middle school to high school. And I actually think that that paper then prepares them for the high school work to come. But it can be a lot. Depending on your skills as a reader and a writer and a researcher. So are we bridging that gap through both departments, because there are linguistic skills and historical skills that need to come into play? So
yes, there are ways that we are collaborating with the English department. I will say I don't have we had a formal meeting with the 6 through 12 English and social studies together to do this? No, but when you look at it at the middle school level, because of the team structure and the team setup, they have that wonderful opportunity to be able to talk as a social studies teacher and an English teacher about what's coming up. And what's on the horizon and how can we support each other. And so that does happen quite often at the middle school level. There are also points where they're reading a text in English, but then they're writing a companion piece in social studies. And so there are ways that we try to make the approach somewhat interdisciplinary and reinforcing those writing skills through them. When we move to the high school, it does tend to be more separate, quite honestly. But it is something that Mr. Janasco and I have talked a lot about, and we do like the idea of trying to have something that would bring everyone together more. I think there's lots of times that sort of collaboration tends to be somewhat informal. Our Learning Connections room, the physical space that we have between the two offices at the high school level, does allow for a lot of cross-pollination. And so you can often find teachers doing it, but it isn't as explicit. One challenge that we're also somewhat faced with is that what we ask students to do typically with their argumentative style of writing does tend to be a little bit different than what they're expected to do in English. In English, they're, well, let me not talk too much about the English department. Let me stay focused on my department. I think, we have kind of a clear vision for what that should look like and really teach into that. So it is supported by what the English department does, but their approach is also a little bit different in the way that they do it. It's certainly something that I would be, I'll be happy to follow up with Mr. Janasco on and talk about further, because I do think there's value in that. But like this year, as we had our focus on writing, I felt like we really needed to do that as a department before we started to introduce others into that, because I wanted us to really be in a solid place, feeling like we know what writing looks like 6 through 12 before we start to get influences from other places and start to look at what that looks like.
No, and so I completely appreciate that. And maybe the best way is then to base it in the history department. I guess what we had heard over the years is kind of parents coming to us saying, this course is so overwhelming and it has so much, and our kids have never written this way. So part of it is maybe setting parent expectations, like, you're right, we've never written this way, and so it's a learning process.
Yeah.
But I think maybe if, or I would just say, if you haven't already, that message seems to still drive through. And we had a COVID interruption, so maybe it's changed this year. Do kids really know the skills? They at the end of the year, they really want to know how to do it. But oftentimes, kind of, at least what we hear at the board level is they've never had writing like this before. They don't know what to do. So food for thought. It could also just be anecdotal.
Yeah, no, I do appreciate it. And that, that's part of why one of the last, with the professional development that I listed out there, one of the things that we did take a look at was the language that we used, because it does, writing is a very personal thing in many ways. And so we kind of have to teach students a formula for it. But then when they get good enough, we say, well, break the formula. That's not, the formula isn't necessarily where we want you to be. We want you to start there to understand the fundamentals and then go beyond that. But I think, when I look at 6 through 12, and I can see that there's a path that we take from grade 6 through grade 12 with writing. And so when I look at 8th to 9th grade in particular, this Civil War research paper is in a lot of ways a really good preparation for it. The expectations around what their thesis look like is similar to what they're going to be expected to do in the high school level. The research is similar in the sense that they're looking at multiple sources. They take notes with the same Noodle tool system that we have in middle school and high school. So there's a lot of ways that it's paralleled. And I oftentimes will also tell, one of the nice things popping in and out of classes, I will oftentimes, after an 8th grade class, say to a teacher, you can also let them know this is what it's going to look like next year when they ask this question again, or, this is what it looks like in 9th grade. And I can also tell our 9th grade teachers, don't let them tell you that they've never been expected to do a works cited or a citation page before, because that's not true. I've been in classes where they've done that in 8th grade. And so I often also, just one last thing I say to the middle school teachers a lot is tell them, save your stuff from this class you'll be able to use it again and look back at it, as we end this year and get feedback on those papers. It's something that I hope kids will kind of make a few notes of my future to-do list so that they can make sure that they learn from their work and grow in the future.
That's great. Thank you.
So I'm going to go back a little bit to what Mrs. Best touched on. The environment this year has changed a little bit in terms of there's a little more parental involvement, parental scrutiny, perhaps, of what's in front of their children. I feel very strongly that teachers are not robots, that we should expect teachers to bring their A games at all times. And we hire the best of the best in this district. And we are very lucky to have the people in front of our children that we do. How do you manage, as a department chair, the autonomy of a teacher and respecting their expertise in their fields, but also, maintaining some of the standards that you expect? So talk us through that process a little bit, please.
So I think, thinking about some of the work that we've done with our curriculum is maybe a helpful place to start. That, in that curriculum document, there are those essential and driving questions that teachers will use. There's a core of content that we're expecting teachers to all access. And there is an essential skills that they're also going to be expected to have covered at their classes. So with that as kind of like an agreed upon curriculum, there is room for us to have some creativity. And I agree wholeheartedly that, the hiring process in this district is not an easy one. And we really do hire high quality candidates. And it's one of the things that I ask a lot when I go through the interview process with them is, what are your other interests, and, what excites you about the work that we do in the social studies. So for a teacher to say they're not that into it would not be a teacher that we would be hiring. So I think having that set agreement gives us that room for creativity, and I love to see it. And teachers will come and see and talk with me if they're, particularly this year, if there was concern about, am I taking this in an okay direction? So we have some of those sorts of conversations to make sure that we're kind of aligned in our thinking with that. But I think for our classes to be interesting and compelling, and for our students to really like our classes and get a lot out of them, particularly when there are electives, where students can choose, I think, we have to make sure that there is an element of creativity. That's what students will remember. That's what's going to really stick with them and how they're really going to grow.
Let's have another super quick question.
Sure.
How many students chose to take the new class that was offered this fall?
This past year, we did offer it. I don't know the number off the top of my head. I want to say it was in the teens.
So there was a good amount of interest.
Yeah, it was a pretty decent number. We also did offer it at Darien High School and also at Fitch Academy.
Thank you. Further questions? Mrs. Akman?
Well, so again, you're gonna have to indulge me slightly anecdotally, but I know there's been some questions about why these courses, and yes, the state of Connecticut has said these are course offerings you should do. These courses are elective. So it's great to hear that students have more choice. We've talked a lot about choice and voice, both at the high school and the middle school level. These are all high school level courses at this point, and kids who have really satisfied some of the basic core courses. So I love that we're giving students more choice and voice in terms of history. And I will say the anecdotal part of this, as someone who is self-described and taking as many history courses as I could in government and law, it was not until my senior year of college that I even had the choice to look at the time what was called African American history. And it was just more knowledge in my tool belt of understanding how our democracy was built. And so I just think that our kids are really benefiting by just giving them more information at this time. And I think that we would do well as a district to really acknowledge that we've embraced this. We have kids are interested in those tools and we're providing them with it. Again, it's not changing their course segment in US law and gov. It's not changing their course study in Western civilization. But the idea that we are giving students opportunities that I didn't have almost into my 20s, and someone who's searching out options, I think our kids are really at a benefit. And it really goes to the department that they were able so quickly to get this together and give our kids this opportunity. So thank you.
I think it's exciting. Thank you. Anything else? All right, thank you.
Yeah, I would just mention that academic, I won't call it freedom, but it is, but that academic professional judgment of our staff crosses not only social studies, it crosses all disciplines where that is exercised and are actually dependent on that as an integral component of developing these courses and experiences for the kids. And I very much appreciate, Ms. Zach, when you put on the table the opportunity for our kids to experience these other courses and other diverse perspectives and things that's very helpful. I do want to just ask one question, either of Chris or otherwise of Keith, because it might be pertinent to other disciplines. You talked about the state coming in with new guidelines and frameworks, right? So what does that really mean in the sense for us or for a discipline? Do we have to accept all those frameworks? Do we have to accept everything they suggest or otherwise? Or how big level, how it's going to inform, or what flexibility we have or otherwise?
Yeah,
Just
I'm happy
because it's coming for
Yeah.
other things.
Yeah. So we still do have, when the state releases this, we have to first start by studying this and really looking at what makes sense within the work that the classes that we have. We're not bound to it. It's not, something that has to be exactly this way, and the change doesn't have to happen immediately. Certainly we would want to give it good consideration. I think I haven't had a chance to look at some of the guiding principles that are being used in the construction of the content standards, and they are very much aligned with what I've just presented here. So I would think that when we get it, I would think there will be no surprises that we would say, wow, we were totally off with what we were doing, or we never included anything like this. My hope is that with all the expertise they have in the state, there's likely would be some additions that we would make that might be interesting for our classes, though.
Thank you.
I'll actually elaborate on that a little bit more in my presentation coming up.
No, this is fine, yes.
May I just elaborate on one point also, just the differentiation and access? Just Keith, if I may just add to that. The opportunity for that for all students. It happens for students with learning differences by accommodations and modifications within all the different course offerings. And also happens by the differentiation opportunities of the different course offerings in terms of team talk classes, lab classes, and comprehensive classes. And I know everyone's familiar with that, but I just wanted to really focus on that, of how that does really ensure access for all learners.
Thank you. This is fine.
And finally, I'd just like to say, if I may, I just want to thank Keith for his leadership, particularly in this domain and particularly in these challenging times. I'll say for your courageous leadership in some ways, and your responsiveness of your staff to the community on the issues that have come up. It's not easy in these times, and we recognize that, and we appreciate your steadfast and steady leadership. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I will extend one more thank you to the wonderful departments at both the middle school and the high school who are tremendous professionals and do some really amazing work. So thank you.
Thank you for being here this morning, Mr. Keeler. All right, Dr. Tramrow.
Thank you and good morning. I'll be strategically and intentionally brief, and then glad to dig in wherever you would like me to. So thank you to the board for generously allocating many resources to the work that we do in the summer. So I thought that this would be a good look at what our focus is going in to summer of 2022. So we'll look a bit at EduPlanet, the curriculum website, and what our focus areas are. And the theme that I hope will come across is this is about consistency and clarity and communication, because all three of these touch on those points. And little photo there of our DEI team in action. So those are the members at our last meeting. So first, EduPlanet 21, which is our new curriculum management platform. This is a significant lift. It's not a shift in how we approach curriculum because it'll still be through a backwards design model, but we are creating and migrating thousands and thousands of pages of curriculum into a new platform for many reasons. And one of them is so it looks consistent across all disciplines and all grade levels. So as a teacher going in to look at a unit of study or a parent going in to see the parent facing side, no matter what they're looking at, they're going to understand that this is the stage one, which they'll see, which are the essential questions that Mr. Kierlo referenced, enduring understandings, the knowledge and the skills, and the actual standards and supporting standards that go with the unit. We're also participating. EduPlanet offers a course planner. So if parents just want to know what happens in this unit of study, they can read a 1-paragraph description. So they know for this period of time, this is what it looks like. And if they want to know a lot more, like the specific standards, they can go in and understand at that next level. So with our year one this summer, we have a lot of back-end platform to build. So that means making sure we have all of our courses loaded up in EduPlanet. All the standards are there. And since this is customizable, they've loaded all of our vision of the graduate principles as well. So every single unit of study from PK through 12 will highlight where it's connecting to the vision of the graduate. Ultimately, and this touches on something that Mr. Keeler referenced and Mr. Janosko during his presentation, when we identify a specific assessment in a unit of study as a measure of one of those pillars or attributes, we want to make sure that follows the student. So we have a portfolio of their work. So that will connect to EduPlanet and the vision of the graduate in a really nice way. So long-term transfer. So one of the challenges that we've faced this year is thinking about just the facts. So we heard a lot, just teach the facts. In education, it's really about the transfer. So yes, I know for kids especially, it feels like there's so much learning and recall, but we're doing all of that so they can transfer that knowledge to new situations. So all of our curriculum has always been designed by understanding by design on long-term transfer. So we teach for transfer. We're always looking at not only what is the value of knowing this right now, but what are you going to do with it in the future and why is it there? So the work this summer is making sure we have the long-term transfer identified in all of the grade levels and content areas. We are going to work on trying to get 2 units for every single course and grade level and every discipline into the platform this summer. So that's a big goal, but we are going to try to do that. And there's also a professional development platform on the back end. So Jay McTighe, who's one of the creators of Understanding by Design, there are videos of him talking teachers through how to create a unit, and we can also customize those things and build our own virtual professional development, and it will keep track of teachers completing that if we want to utilize it that way as well. The curriculum website, I was inspired by Mrs. Klein's department, so we overhauled our curriculum page, try to create one landing page for all of our curriculum information, because there's many clicks to find things at times. So this hopefully reduced the clicks for people. And when EduPlanet comes in, it'll reduce the clicks even more. So if you go to our district webpage and click on curriculum, you'll see everything that you need from that home landing page, hopefully. And that's a work in progress. And shout out to Michelle Lopez for making that much more clear. And the third piece I wanted to talk about were just our focus areas for this summer. So with Beyond EduPlanet, what we're going to do is our new and any changed courses, which we've already discussed. Those were approved, I think, at our November or December meeting of the full board. So those are the new courses listed that we are going to build, and they will be built in EduPlanet. Elementary math is going to be our focus for what we're going to take a really close look at. So we have Math in Focus as our primary instructional resource. We just want to be clear for teachers that just because something is the primary instructional resource does not mean it's actually the curriculum. So it's a book that we need to bring to life. We want to make sure and empower teachers to not feel like they have to be stuck in that book to deliver dynamic instruction to students. So that's our focus area in that arena. Differentiation. There are several words in education that have been just overused and therefore excused. And I think differentiation is one of them. There's not a better word for it yet, so I'm still calling it differentiation. But in the third stage of our units, we are going to make sure that we articulate what the differentiation is going to be, especially for students with learning differences. I know families have heard across our country that the answer is differentiation. And that is a big part of the answer, but we want to make sure we're articulating how we're doing that. It's not just going to be an idea, it's going to be operationalized in the planning. So that's a part of that. And the same for enrichment opportunities within those units of study. And back in 2019, I believe, we were contracting for some help with our physical education and health curriculum. So that also resulted in hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents that are going to be organized and rolled out for next year as well. So we're going to make sure that that is clear, and we'll provide PD for our PE teachers as well. So the health came first and then the physical education, just in time for the state of Connecticut to roll out a brand new health and physical education framework. The good news is the framework that we used with our outside consultants at the time used the national framework that Connecticut referenced in developing theirs. So we're not misaligned. And it's very, very dense. And there's no way that we could ever cover everything that's in any framework. So this goes to Dr. Adley's point earlier. Every discipline has standards and hopefully a framework for us to rely upon. We make a choice based on what is there to develop our curriculum in a way that we think is going to prepare students. So we prioritize the standards, and we have the opportunity to do that in each unit of study. We have prioritized and supporting standards. When we prioritize them, that means we measure and assess them in some way. If they're supporting, that means we want to make sure they're part of the teaching and learning that happens within the course. So that's how we're approaching that. And that framework is relatively new, and we're reviewing it, and we'll do a crosswalk with all of the new materials that we have. There's also plenty of new legislation that I'm sure will come up in the policy committee of optional and recommended and model curriculum. So the state is stepping in more than they ever have in the past with providing examples of things. It would be, I shouldn't say unlikely, but I'll say it for now. It would be unlikely for Darien to adopt state created curriculum. That would not be something I would expect unless there's something that we haven't thought of before, but that's not how Darien has been before. And I don't think that's where we're going.
Thank you for that. Questions for Dr. Tranberg? I just have an operational question. It sounds like this migrating into EduPlanet 21 is a huge lift, as you said. How does that work? Is it a responsibility of a core group of people? Is every classroom teacher doing part of it? How operationally is that working?
That's a great question. So I remember I worked in a place once upon a time where we had a group of people that did all the curriculum, and all the teachers, this is when I was a teacher, we just called them the curriculum elves because we didn't know where our curriculum came from. So what we're doing is we are very fortunate to have a curriculum leadership team, but we're also identifying teachers in every department and across grade levels at the elementary level that will take the lead in the EduPlanet side of things. And EduPlanet's not just about inputting information into a digital platform. It's really doing it's taking a close look and asking really important questions about what's in the documents. So we'll have teachers that are trained. We're offering our first session next week, and then we have another session the week after that. So the people that are trained will work with other teachers who are writing curriculum over the summer. Because when teachers don't have ownership of the curriculum that they have to teach, there's a disconnect, and sometimes it's not something that they look at as important. So that's our strategy to do that.
That was the point behind my question. Was I think the more people get involved in it, the better the whole process will be.
Thank you. I have, I guess, some questions on EduPlanet also. It sounds like it'll be a great tool or resource or organization of resources when it's fully functional. Did I see that it's 2026 when you'll hope to have everything in
2026.
Okay.
And I don't think it sounds ambitious at times, but I think it's doable. And the reason I think it's doable is as soon as we get our first round through this year, getting to know the leaders and the teachers as I have in the past few years, they're going to want everything in there as soon as possible, just because it's going to be very useful to them.
Right. And for it to be useful to parents, how do we envision that playing out? And will parents need to become EduPlanet savvy, or would it be like you go to the website, the curriculum website, and when I click on a particular department, I enter the EduPlanet world without even being aware of it?
Yeah,
so to
exactly.
speak?
You wouldn't
Okay.
even know. So that it'll interface with our website. So when parents click on curriculum and go to a course, they're leaving Darien Public Schools website, but they actually match the look of our website as well. So it doesn't look like you're in a new and different place.
Okay, great.
So they customize their page to match us.
Okay, terrific.
And that sounds great. I think, so much of our conversations around this table is communication with parents, and hopefully this will streamline and help the community. So I'm grateful for you all for doing this incredible lift. Agreed. Further questions, comments? All right. Thank you all very much for your time, and motion to adjourn. Okay.
Public
Yeah,
comment.
public-
Oh, sorry, public comment. Sorry, I'm ready to go. Is there public comment? Anybody in the audience? No?
Anyone in person?
Ms.
No
McCammon,
hands.
anything? Nope. Okay,
No
All right.
hands raised on Zoom.
thank you. Now maybe adjourn.